Welcome along to Obsession Engineering. A few days ago I realised I was getting the itchy trigger finger because it's been a while since I've bought a motorbike. Don't get me wrong, I have enough motorbikes, I have very limited space to put any more motorbikes, and I have no real time to ride any more motorbikes, but it doesn't mean I don't want to scratch that itch and buy another bike. So of course I had the brainwave. What I shall do is I shall buy something, do a little bit of tidying up work, and then sell it on and make myself some money. Hopefully. So I went on the internet and I found the perfect bike. It is basically right underneath. It just needs a little bit of TLC and then we hopefully will be able to spin some profit. So here it is. This is a 2005 749 Ducati Biposto, so it has two seats. Now this is actually quite an unusual bike because most of the later 05 onwards bikes with the different swinging arm also had a red frame, but this one has a silver frame, so it's probably in effect a leftover frame from the silver frame bikes with a later swinging arm in it and the later fairing. I do have the mirrors, but the gentleman I bought it off had it in his conservatory and it was easy for him to get it out with the mirrors off and I had no reason to put them back on yet. So the good bits of the bike. Well, it has no crash damage, there's no stupid crash bungs drilled through the lovely big red fairing panels, it's only done 11,200 miles, it has almost complete service history, a lot of it from JHP Ducati, so it has, had the attention it requires. But of course it's not perfect. If we look a little bit closer, some of the fasteners and bits in the usual style Ducati don't have very much plating on them and are looking a little bit careworn. A few more of the fasteners have actually been painted silver to hide the fact that they're not brilliant. There's a few little marks here and there just from the fact the bike's actually being used, but nothing, major or structural, just cosmetics. So what I need to do is take it apart a little bit, give it a thorough cleaning, give it a deep service, tidy up a few little bits, and then hopefully sell it on for much profit. So, a few extra details. The lacquer on the back of the tank is looking just a little bit flat and a little bit dull. There is a couple of tiny little bits of lacquer lifting other places. There's a few little rub marks where the bike's being used. There's marks here and there. The shock body is looking a little bit sorry for itself because all the rubbish off the back wheel has been hitting it because it's never had a hugger on it. The exhaust pipes could do with a clean, and to be fair, when you just get into it, the whole bike could just do with a really good deep clean because it's actually been used more than it's been polished. So the first task on the 749 is going to be giving it a thorough wash. So to do that I'm going to take the side panels and belly pan bits off, put it on a paddock stand on the rear, get it upright and just get on my hands and knees and give it a good scrubbing. So under the fairing it's pretty much the same deal as with it on. It's all sort of correct, it just needs a little bit of cleaning and a little bit of TLC. So there's a few fairy fasteners here and there, there's a bit of an oil leak down here somewhere, but one of the service book bits, one of the service receipts even, was for a leaky rocker cover gasket, so it could well be that this one's leaked down onto here and there's a bit of oil everywhere. So I'm going to get the degreaser out, give everything a thorough scrubbing, and then we can have a real assessment of what we've actually got. Now would probably be a reasonable time to point out the thing I forgot to mention earlier. I paid for this 749 Ducati £3,700, which I think is a bargain. This is my next cheap Ducati. So I've had the bike running for a few minutes now to dry itself out and it is running absolutely lovely. Starts on the button and everything works. Having done a decent clean on it, there are the usual bits that I noticed before, a few fasteners that are, could do with a little bit of attention, but in general the bike's cut quite nicely. There is still some of the original paint left on the engine, which is unusual for a used Ducati. The chain and sprockets look good, the tyres don't, but I knew about that beforehand. There's no major leaks from anything, it all looks pretty good. So the next thing to do is get it in the workshop and give it a bit of a service. Now that we're in the workshop, I'm going to start by taking off the tank and a couple of seat unit panels so I can go and get a little bit of paint touched up. Because if you can see it in this light, the paint at the back of the tank here has just gone a little bit flat and got rubbed a bit, probably by, somebody actually sitting on the bike and riding it. So I'm going to drain the fuel out of the tank, whip the tank off it, and then whip the seat unit side panels off so I can get a bit of paint touched up over there, drop them off with my painter, and hopefully before too long they'll be back and looking shiny. The tank is near enough empty and that can come off next, but before I can take that off I need that seat off, which means I need all these bits of seat off and stuff. So I've released the pillion seat from the catch down there, and then I think it's just a case of undoing a couple of bolts and taking some panels off. Kind of hope it's that easy anyway, but was the Italians, and if it was designed on a Friday afternoon, who knows what will have happened underneath. So it turns out this whole arrangement might well have been done on a Friday afternoon after a little vino, because to take the little pod off the back is really easy. It's 6 screws, just comes off. But all of this is all bolted together. So now I've got the bolts taken out of here, it's all connected together. Which I'm sure there is a logic to it, but it might be slightly wine-filled Italian logic. Either way, it's all got to come off. So once I have the fuel tank and half the seat unit wedged up on a piece of wood, then I can actually get in here to a couple of relatively quick release connectors that dribble a little bit of fuel out, and the electrical connection from there. So they're all disconnected, so now the tank will be relatively easy to get off, I hope. And one thing they did make nice and simple was removing the tank, because it literally pushes into there. So just pull it out those 2 little plugs and we're easy, apart from the little breather thing that disappears down there, but that's just a couple of rubber pipes to pull off the tank. So that's it, the tank is on the floor, and I just need to actually unbolt the seat from it, and then it can all go to the painters. So now that the 749 is pretty clean, and I've sent a load of bits of bodywork off to the painters, it's time to get a bit more involved, because I've got a few fasteners and bits that I want to get taken off and get away to be plated. I'm going to be putting some tyres in it, and it's due a big service. So I'll best get cracking. So nothing on the bike is terrible, but there's just a few bits that would look considerably better if they were a bit brighter. Like the wheel spindles and bits, if they're nice and bright and clean, they look a lot better, and at the moment they're just a bit dull. So I'm going to take the nut off and actually the spindle and send that away. Just going to get some of the bolts on the calipers and bits done, little bits for the heat shield and stuff, especially the stuff that's really obvious as soon as you look at it. It'll do absolutely no harm at all to get them just tidied up a little bit. So I've got to take the wheels out anyway, so I'm going to get the spindles done, a few bolts done and that sort of stuff, and then I will be diving inside the big noisy bit there, because it wants a valve clearance service, and I'm going to put some cam belts on at the same time. So I'm going to start at the top, may as well take the last of the bodywork off, so I'll take that off and I'll take the front mudguard off, and then I'm just going to basically go through it, and anything that looks a little bit furry or a little bit dull, I'm just going to take it off, put it in a pile, take a photograph of where it came from so I can remember where each bolt goes later, and then pop them in the post to be plated. So I've been at the bike, getting on for about 2 hours now, and I've made a reasonable amount of progress. The front wheel is out, and there are a couple of interesting things with that, because at some point somebody had even painted the wheel spindle where you can see it, even though underneath you can actually see the plating underneath. Didn't look too bad, but they've painted it anyway so that it matched the paint on the fork bottoms, and they've painted the space from the other side. But because they'd painted that, it was actually quite awkward to get out, because obviously it wasn't the right size to slide through the fork bottom anymore. So who did that? It may have even been a dealer who tried to make the bike look a little bit better to sell it, but never mind. Right, so that's the spindles out, mudguards off. The top radiator is looking a little bit like it's been used, so I've got to drop that off to get in the rocker cover to do the valve clearances in the front cylinder anyway. So when I've got it off, I shall give it a decent rub down, give it a thorough clean. I'll then lightly dust it with some black paint so it looks a bit better. I can get in, clean all the insides of the forks, I'll clean the calipers and bits. And then we move down here a bit further. I've put some stainless bolts and bits in this cover so I could take the original bolts out without any chance of the cover coming loose, because I don't need to take that off. The clutch cover ones are off and there's just one bolt in the bottom, so that doesn't fall off, although it's not really, doesn't really matter because it's a dry clutch anyway. There's bits off the exhaust. I've taken the nuts off the back cylinder exhaust because I'm actually going to take some of the header pipe bits off and give them a bit more of a thorough clean. Turns out that these bolts are actually stainless, but somebody has still painted silver over the top of them. Why you'd paint a stainless bolt is a mystery to me, but there you go. And then I've just sort of taken off brackets and bolts and bits and pieces pretty much everywhere so that I can go and get it all made to look a bit shinier. And the front sprocket is decidedly hooky. Now, the chain is actually fine, other than a tiny little bit of surface rust there. The chain's actually fine. I've done a stretch check on it, and it isn't stretched. The rear sprocket is fine, so I'm guessing at some point somebody's just not bothered to change the front sprocket when they've changed everything else. And these are not expensive. So I'll be putting a front sprocket on, might even put a rear on to match. And yeah, we are getting pretty good progress now. I'm just going to strip the front wheel down because I want the disc bolts off it down there. So there's a few more little bits to do, but we're making good progress. So down on the floor are the wheels minus the discs, but more accurately minus the disc bolts, and I've taken the sprocket nuts off to get done as well, and I'm going to change the sprocket because somebody had painted it silver and painted the nuts as well. And it actually looked okay, but I knew it wasn't right, so it's getting redone. So over on the bike, I've given the forks a bit of a clean on the inside, and they've come up okay. There is a little bit of sort of light corrosion on the inside of the aluminium, more on this one than that one. But the actual steel chrome section, the stanchion itself, is in really good order, and there's no pitting that I can find. The calipers could do with a very thorough clean, so that's a job for slightly later. And the next thing I want to do now is take the radiator off. And I need to do this for two reasons. To get the front rocker cover off, to do the valve clearances I need the radiator off anyway, and while it's off I'm going to give it a bit of a clean up and a little bit of a paint so that it looks a little bit nicer. So if we go around this side, what I need to do here is undo the drain plug that drains the antifreeze out of the bike, drain that out into a bucket, and then basically just go around all the hose clips and bits on the radiator and take each one off. And then undo the bolts, take the rad off. Relatively straightforward. So I've got the radiator off and I've just got the bucket underneath the lower pipe because this is sort of the lowest point in the coolant system, so it can catch any last little drips. And now I can get to the front rocker cover. And it doesn't look particularly pleasant because it gets all the weather and stuff thrown straight at it. And in the standard Ducati engine style, the paint flakes off them at the first sign of anything that isn't the middle of summer. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take the nuts off and I'm going to stick them in the tub to be plated, and when I've got the rocker cover off doing the valve clearances, what I'll probably do is actually give it a blast and either a little coat of paint or at least something so that it's just got that little bit of protection and hopefully will look a little bit nicer too, even if it isn't an exact colour match to the rest of the engine. So with the bike in quite a lot of pieces, I've decided I'm going to start tinkering around with some of these smaller items. So onwards to the bench. So this is the heat shield that sits over the exhaust pipe, and it gets rubbed by the back of your ankle or by your foot or whatever, and at some point somebody's obviously had fairly rough boots that have taken quite a lot of the paint and bits off that. But it is aluminium, so it doesn't really need paint on it. The same story goes for that heel plate, which at some point somebody's repainted. And this one, you can see somewhere in the right light that it has got a few marks on from where it had been scratched before, but the paint that's on that one hasn't been rubbed off. But I'd quite like all of these items to match, and that sticks out quite obviously. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to stick them in the shot blaster, blast the original paint and the repainted paint off them, and then I can make a decision as to whether I go for a Scotch-Brite brushed finish, which I think will look quite nice, or whether I paint them again, but all the same colour. So this is the difference. This one is just shot blasted, so it's a very matte finish, but it looks okay, it's nice and clean, and it actually looks pretty good. This one, which is considerably shinier and nicer, I think, this has been Scotch-Brited. So all I've done with this is literally get some Scotch-Brite pads, I use the red pads, and just move them forwards and backwards. None of this swirling round stuff, because you don't want the swirls in it. You want that sort of brushed finish that I've managed to get onto there. And I really like the brush finish you get with Scotch-Briting stuff. It takes a little bit of time. I mean, this is probably a whole 10 minutes work, including blasting it and Scotch-Briting it, and I just think it gives them a nice clean look. So I'm going to do this one, I'm also going to do the exhaust guard, and then it's another bit done. Right, that's all the bits that previously didn't look brilliant, all nice and shiny and kind of uniform, so the light's just reflecting off that one, but it's not got a mark on it anymore, honest. So that's looking pretty good. It's quite nice to actually get to the stage where I'm, fixing things, not just taking stuff apart. Cracking job. So I fitted a new front tyre to the 749 wheel, and the rear is actually out of the ZX10 project I did a few months ago, because the ones that are on it were from 2015, and that one's from 2019, so it's considerably newer, and the front is obviously very new because the one that was on it was old and the wrong shape because it had all worn out. So that's another little bit done. The next thing on the agenda is to do the engine service, but not tonight. Thanks for watching, and join me again next time when I'll be doing the valve clearance service and cam belt on my cheap little Ducati.